My name is Emma. I'm 30 years old and work as a financial analyst for a small investment firm in London. Some people say I'm obsessed with money, but I wouldn't call it that. I just like to plan. If you want anything, you must work for it, correct? That was something my parents taught me from an early age. Growing up, I didn't have the luxury of being the golden child who received everything handed to them. If I wanted something, I had to go get it myself. I've always been the second child, the quiet one. My older sister, Sophie, was always in the spotlight. She was the attractive one, the charming one, and the social butterfly. You know the type. She breezed through life while I did everything I could to avoid her shadow. Don't get me wrong, I adore Sophie. But there was no denying that my parents adored her. It was as if she could do nothing wrong. And me? I was just there. Do you know how it feels? Sophie married Alex shortly after finishing university. Alex works in marketing, and they soon adjusted to their new life together. They currently have 2 children, 6-year-old Lily and 3-year-old Ben. I adore my niece and nephew, of course, but Sophie always moans about how difficult it is to live in their little 2-bedroom flat. I've heard plenty about how cramped they are, don't get me wrong. I understand how difficult it is to be a mother, but sometimes I simply want to yell, "You have a family!" I don't. That's the way things are. Meanwhile, I've been living on my own in a lovely 1-bedroom flat in East London, which was rented at a terrific price by a friend of a friend. I've been saving like crazy. I don't dine out much, I don't buy new clothes on a regular basis, and I use public transit, despite the fact that my friends think I'm insane. But you know what? I did not mind. I was concentrating. I had a plan. I've always wanted to own my own home, preferably a charming small hamlet in the countryside. The noise of the city was beginning to bother me, and after the epidemic, I learned I could work remotely. It seemed like the ideal time to make it happen, so I did what anyone who has been saving for years would do. I began studying. I wasn't in a rush, but I thought it was time to take the next step. I spent hours browsing online for a small house in the woods. Something quiet and pleasant. Something specifically for me. After months of hunting, I finally discovered it. A modest cottage located around an hour and a half outside of London. It featured 2 bedrooms, a comfortable kitchen, and a lovely yard. It was perfect. It wasn't too big, just enough for me and my future plans. What about the price? It was within my budget due to my cautious saving. That day, I sat down with my laptop, read over the listing once more, and clicked the Contact Agent button. I was ready to make the leap. I knew it would be difficult, but I also knew it was time. I'd worked hard for it. It was my time. But then my mother called. "Emma, sweetie, do not forget about supper on Saturday. We're having the entire family over. Sophie and Alex will also be present, along with the children. And please try to arrive on time this time," she urged in her normal tone, which was half demand and half admonition. I rolled my eyes but consented. After all, family is family, correct? Despite the fact that they occasionally drove me nuts. I arrived at my parents' house on Saturday evening at precisely 5:55 p.m. Because, of course, if you're not 5 minutes early, you're late in my family. Sophie's car was already in the driveway, so I had to park down the street. As I approached the house, I could already hear the children screaming and laughing. Lily and Ben were presumably chasing each other around the house, while Sophie, in her typical motherly turmoil, was probably attempting to keep them from destroying the home. When I came in, I was met by the familiar scene. Sophie and Alex were sitting at the table, talking about their day as they tried to get the kids to sit down. Mom was scurrying around, stressing over the lasagna she was preparing, and Dad was already sitting in his favorite chair, newspaper in hand, moaning about the cost of things. Same old, Emma is here," Sophie said, scarcely looking up from where she was attempting to keep Ben from dumping his water all over the table. The youngsters barely recognized me, but this is nothing new. I've learned to simply step back and let them have their moment. I sat down at the table, wanting to simply enjoy my dinner and retreat into my thoughts. But of course, this did not last long. "You've been awfully quiet, Emma," Mom began, her voice piercing my daydreams. "What's on your mind?" I was caught off guard, but I grinned and shook it off. "Just work stuff," I explained, trying to keep it light. Mom gave me a knowing glance. "Uh-huh, sure," she said, pushing a plate of lasagna toward me. "So, have you considered settling down? Perhaps moving closer to family?" I froze for a moment. The casual question sounded like a covert jab. They always urged me to settle down, as Sophie did. "Well, actually," I explained, taking a long breath, "I've been looking at houses. I believe it is time for me to get one of my own." That's when things changed. The entire table went silent. Sophie's fork came to a halt halfway to her lips, and Alex, who had earlier complained about his boss, paused in mid-sentence. Even the children appeared to pause for a second, as if they could feel the tension in the air. "Buying a house?" Mom said, her voice full of doubt. "You? So, where exactly?" I hadn't expected the question to make things feel so wrong. I wasn't attempting to create a scene. I just wanted to express my excitement. But in the air, it seemed like I'd dropped a bomb. "I'm just looking into options," I answered, attempting to dismiss it. "Nothing too big, just something small." I attempted to redirect the conversation. "Hey, Mom, this lasagna is great. Did you change the recipe?" But I felt it. The tension. It was thick enough to slice with a knife. My parents exchanged a look that said all without words. Sophie kept looking at Alex. Everyone at the table tried to seem as if nothing had changed, but I knew something was up. Something had shifted. The rest of supper was a whirl of forced chatter and awkward silence. We all played our regular roles. Dad moaned about the economy, Alex yelled at his boss, and Sophie half listened while attempting to keep the kids from making a mess. Meanwhile, my mind was racing. I could feel the conversation's weight hanging in the air like a fog over my head. I had not expected it to be such a big problem. After dinner, everyone wandered around the living room, making small chat and drinking wine. I didn't want to be around that, so I made an excuse and grabbed my coat. "I'll just go for a quick walk," I explained, my voice tight. "Oh, Emma, please stay for a little longer," Mom insisted, her tone now more enthusiastic. "We haven't had a chance to really talk." She smiled, but her eyes held a flicker of something unspoken. I gave a fake smile back. "I'm just a little fatigued. I'll catch up with everyone soon." I slid out the door and into the crisp evening air, attempting to shake off the heaviness I felt. The walk did not help. It never did. I had always tried to make my own decisions, but it felt as if my family was continually making plans for me, plans I was completely unaware of. As I traveled down the familiar streets, I kept thinking about my home, my cottage. It felt like such a victory to me. Finally, a space to call my own. A spot where I could get away from the city hubbub and the continual burden of family obligations. But it seemed like that dream was already slipping through my fingers. I hardly slept that night. I tossed and turned, replaying the dinner in my head. The way my parents looked at me, Sophie's tight, forced smile, and the strange, unnerving moment when I told them I was buying a property. I knew they had a concept of what I wanted, but I never imagined it would go this far. My phone buzzed the next morning while I was deep in concentration. Sophie sent a message. I opened it, already fearing what I may discover. "Hey, sis, I've been thinking, are you sure you're making the right decision with this house? You should think about the future. Having a family requires extra space, you know." I stared at the message for a long time, feeling a knot form in my gut. Was she implying what I suspected she was? I typed a brief response, trying to be neutral. "I am sure, Sophie. Thanks for your concern, but I have already made up my decision. I am looking for something small, just for myself. The remark came almost immediately. I understand. Just think about it. You know how difficult it is with the children. Emma, there is space. You'll need space. I set down my phone, frustration rising in my chest. I wasn't sure why it bothered me so much. Sophie didn't ask for anything, correct? She was simply trying to be helpful, right? However, something about the way she phrased it suggested that it wasn't only about the house. It felt as if she was gently urging me to reconsider my decisions. The second message arrived, and this time it was from my mom. Emma, I've been talking with Barbara next door. She's selling her house, and I believe it's ideal for you. It's directly in the neighborhood with plenty of room for a family. I know you've been thinking about buying, so why not look into this one? You won't regret it. My blood became chilly. I could not believe it. Was my family truly planning my future without consulting me? I quickly responded back, attempting to be calm, but I could feel my rage growing. Mom, I am not searching for a large house. I informed you that I'm buying a cottage. Please respect my decision. I pressed submit before I could second-guess myself. For a time, I sat there, staring at the computer, waiting for her to respond. I did not have to wait long. Do you respect your decision? You are being silly. This house is just what you need, and you can't seriously consider living in a tiny cottage by yourself. You are making a mistake, Emma. I put down my phone and rubbed my temples. I wasn't sure what to do anymore. They simply didn't understand it. I wasn't looking for approval, but I couldn't escape the sensation that my parents were attempting to control me, that I wasn't allowed to live my own life and make my own decisions. I had made a decision. The cottage was just what I needed. It was an opportunity to step away from the life they had planned for me. I didn't want to be locked in the city, living in a house that was too big for only me, with rooms I didn't use and a garden I wouldn't have time to maintain. But no matter what I told myself, Sophie's and my mother's statements echoed in my thoughts. Was I selfish? Was it immoral of me to want something just for myself? I spent the following several days in a daze, attempting to concentrate on work while being assaulted with messages from my family, prompting me to reconsider. It felt like they didn't perceive me as a person. They regarded me as part of a larger scheme, their plan. That weekend, I decided to return to the cottage, just to remind myself why I was doing this. I needed clarity. I needed to recall why I had worked so hard to arrive here. I arrived at the property, which was a little two-bedroom bungalow set behind a row of trees. The instant I got out of the car, I felt that usual sense of calm rush over me. The garden was tranquil, with the sound of birds chirping in the background. This is where I belonged. This was my dream. But while I stood there, staring at the mansion, a gnawing sensation crept in my gut. I was aware that when I got home, I would have to face my family. I'd have to approach them and say no, I wasn't giving in. I was not going to let them control my life. What if they don't understand? What if they refuse to accept my desire to live my life on my terms? I took a big breath and made my decision right there in front of the cottage. I was not going to be terrified anymore. I was not going to let their beliefs or expectations stop me from living my life. I'd do it for myself no matter what. As I returned to my car, I felt a glimmer of hope, knowing that I had finally made a decision for myself. It was no longer about them. It was about me. The next 3 days were a flurry of worry, emails, and phone conversations. I felt like my mind was spinning from all the texts I was receiving, the majority of which were from my mother and Sophie. It was almost as if they believed that if they kept pushing, I would alter my mind. And the worst part? I was beginning to feel guilty about it. Guilt. That is what they have always done to me. They make me feel like I'm wrong for seeking something unique, something just for myself. But why was I second-guessing myself? Why was I allowing their words drown out the excitement I felt when I first saw the cottage? I sat at my apartment one day, staring at my laptop and trying to concentrate on work. However, the persistent buzzing of my phone kept drawing me out of my thoughts. I ignored the first few calls, but after the fourth from my mother, I couldn't ignore them anymore. "Emma, you need to listen to me." Mom's voice was stern and nearly desperate. "Barbara's house is perfect for you. It's right in the neighborhood. You wouldn't be so far away from family. You can't be serious about living in that tiny cottage all alone." I closed my eyes and tried to remain quiet. "Mom, I've already made up my mind. The cottage is exactly what I want. It's quiet, peaceful, and just the right size for me. I don't need more space." I could hear her sigh deeply on the other end of the call. "I don't know what you're thinking, Emma. This is a huge mistake. Do you really think you'll be happy living out there all by yourself?" A large lump emerged in my throat. I took a deep breath and tried to hold my voice steady. "Yes, Mom, I do. This is what I've always wanted. I need this space for myself." There was a prolonged pause. I could hear her breathing as she tried to digest what I had said. Finally, she spoke softly. "I just want what's best for you. I want you to be happy." I closed my eyes, the weight of her words crushing down on me. "I know you do, Mom, but this is my decision. I need to do this for myself." She said nothing else. We both remained silent for a long time, as neither of us knew what to say. After a long pause, she finally said, "Okay, I guess if you're really set on this, I won't push anymore. But you'll always have a place here, you know that, right?" It seemed like a tiny win, but I knew it wasn't the end. I knew Sophie would not let this go. She had always been the one to push me, gently nudging me in the route she thought was best. Later that night, Sophie sent me a message. "I hope you're not making any mistakes, Emma. You've always been very independent, but do you really think living out there alone is a smart idea? What if something happens? What if you need assistance?" I wanted to shout. Did she honestly believe I couldn't handle it? That I was incapable of leading my own life? I wasn't some vulnerable person in need of helping, but it seems that was how they perceived me. I could not even respond to her. I didn't want to get into this dispute anymore. I had spent years letting them push me around and control my decisions, but not this time. This time, I did it for myself. The following several days were quieter. I could feel the strain in the air whenever I chatted with my parents or Sophie. They were all attempting to appear normal, but I knew they were waiting for me to back down and accept that they were correct. But I wasn't about to do it. Not this time. I spent the next 2 evenings packing up my place, slowly but steadily. It was strange to think that in just a few days, I would be moving into my own home, my own apartment. I'd always anticipated this moment, but now that it's occurring, it feels unreal. This was my fresh beginning, and I could not let anyone or anything take it away from me. Saturday arrived quickly, and I returned to the cottage, this time to meet with the realtor and finish the transaction. As I drove into the gravel driveway, a familiar calm came over me. The cottage was much more stunning than I remembered. The huge windows, the small yard, the sunroom. I couldn't wait to make this home my own. Amanda, the realtor, was already waiting for me, smiling. "So, Emma," she informed me, "this is it. The paperwork is ready if you're still sure about moving forward." I grinned back, feeling a surge of exhilaration in my chest. "I'm sure. We talked over the legalities, and soon I was signing paperwork to make the house officially mine." I could not believe it. After all these years of saving, making sacrifices, and spending silent evenings wondering whether it would ever happen, I was finally standing there, a homeowner. When I left the realtor's office, I felt as if I were floating. I wanted to phone my parents and tell them I had done it, that I had taken the jump and realized my ambition. But I didn't want to hear their disappointment, the same old theme about how I'd made a mistake. I kept the news to myself. I went back to my flat and began packing, arranging for the movers to arrive the following week. The prospect of leaving my previous place was bittersweet. It had been my first proper home, but now it was time to move on. That night, as I stood in my living room looking at the boxes stacked against the walls, I felt a shift. I'd spent so many years living for others, letting their expectations guide my decisions. But this was mine, and it felt like liberation. I knew the road ahead would not be simple. There would be challenges. Moving to a new location, living alone in a large house. It would take some time to adjust, but this was the first time I was doing it on my own. My phone vibrated the following morning. It came from Sophie. "I hope you are happy, Emma, but you should consider the big picture. You can't keep avoiding your obligations. One day you'll comprehend what you've sacrificed." I didn't respond. I did not need to. I had made my decision, and no one could take it away. Not anymore. As I stood in the empty apartment, I took a deep breath, looked around one final time before walking out the door. This was it, the beginning of anything fresh. For the first time in my life, I was stepping out of the shadows and living the life I had always desired. And nothing, not even my family, would stop me. The relocation went more smoothly than I had anticipated. The movers arrived early, carefully packed everything, and by the afternoon, my former flat was empty, with the exception of a few boxes I hadn't unpacked. I drove to the cottage, my new home, with a mixture of joy and trepidation. This was it. This was mine. As I drove into the gravel driveway, I couldn't help but smile. The house was precisely as I recalled it. Charming and serene, with the garden I'd imagined for months. I went inside, set down the first box, and stood there for a moment, taking everything in. The living area features a wood-burning fireplace, the kitchen, with its new appliances and charming small window that let in the morning sunlight, the sunroom, where I could see birds darting around, and the raised flower beds that would soon be mine to tend to. It was perfect. More than perfect. Despite how amazing everything was, a strong sense of loneliness overcame me. I was alone. I had never lived alone in a space, so empty. I was used to having people around, even if they added to the confusion of living in a shared place. Now I was in my own home, and while it was everything I had hoped for, it was also much quieter than I had expected. I spent the evening unpacking, preparing my working space near the window, organizing the furniture in the living room, and getting everything in order. But the silence continued to seep in. The silence between the boxes felt heavier than I expected. As night fell, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and gazed at the stars. The chirping of crickets filled the air, and the tranquility swept over me. This was exactly what I had been looking for. Independence. But in those quiet moments, the gravity of my decision became palpable. I'd picked this. I had chosen to abandon my family's expectations, and now I was truly on my own. The following week was quieter than normal, but I settled into a groove. I made an effort to call my parents, mostly out of obligation, but I could feel the distance expanding. Each talk felt increasingly strained and unpleasant. They'd ask about my new place, and I'd give the typical answers. "It's great. I'm settling in nicely." But I could tell that wasn't enough. They wanted more. They wanted me to be more like Sophie. They wanted me to need them, to rely on them. Then Sophie sent her first message. "Hello, Emma. I'm very worried about you. Are you sure you're okay out there alone? You cannot be happy living like this. You should stay with us for a while. Perhaps you will see things differently." I looked at the message, my heart sinking. I knew what it was. This was not a concern for my health. This was about her attempts to fix me, to help me see how stupid I was in wanting to be independent. But I wasn't mistaken. I was not. I made a reply, and then deleted it. I typed it again, then removed it. I didn't want to continue playing the same stale game. I wanted to be strong, yet not cruel. I wanted to maintain my position without appearing defensive. "I am all right, Sophie. I'm precisely where I should be." This was my decision. "I have to do this on my own." The response arrived within minutes. "You've always been so stubborn, Emma. Okay, don't listen to me, but one day, you will see." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Sophie is still the same as before, always acting as if she knew better. I knew this wasn't the end of it. She would keep pressing. She always did. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of calls, texts, and messages from my parents and Sophie, all attempting to make me reconsider my decision. "You're being selfish. You'll regret this. What if something goes wrong? Who will help you?" It was exhausting. But through it all, something began to alter within me. The more they pressed, the stronger I got. I didn't need them. I didn't need someone to tell me how to live my life. One evening, after a particularly difficult conversation with Mom in which she mentioned the house in the neighborhood once again, I resolved to stop putting off the inevitable. I needed to address them. I had to tell them I was done being their safety net, that I would live my life my way, and if they couldn't accept it, it was their fault, not mine. I sat at my kitchen table, took a big breath, and called my mother. I could already feel my hands trembling, but I didn't let that deter me. "Hello?" Mom replied. Her voice clipped as if she knew what was coming. "Mom," I began, attempting to keep my voice steady. "We need to talk." I could hear her sigh from the other end. "What happens now, Emma? I've tried to understand, but you aren't being rational." "Mom, I have made my decision. I will not back down. I don't want the house in the neighborhood and don't want to hear about it again. I wish to live at the cottage. I want my own space. I don't need to be a part of the plan you and Sophie have devised for me. There was a long lull, and I feared she was going to hang up on me." Eventually, she spoke. "You're making a mistake, Emma," she replied softly. "But I guess I can't do anything about it. You are an adult now. You are free to make your own decisions, even if I do not agree." "Exactly," I replied, finally feeling a weight lifted from my shoulders. "I am permitted to make my own decisions. And this one is mine." After a few more harsh remarks, the conversation came to an end. It was not an apology, nor was it a grand reconciliation. But for the first time, I didn't feel compelled to justify myself. I did not owe them anything. That night, I sat on my porch and stared at the stars. The silence didn't feel as heavy now. I'd stood up for myself. I had finally gained control of my life. The next morning, I got up early and headed to the garden, already planning what to plant. I fantasized about having a tiny vegetable garden full of herbs to cook with. There was so much I wanted to do, so much potential in this area. And for the first time in a long time, I thought I was on the right track. My decision was not easy, but it was mine. And I was beginning to realize that this was plenty. The days after my chat with Mom seemed strange. It felt strangely peaceful to finally stand my ground. But with that tranquility came stillness. I was expecting my phone to buzz and my relatives would try to contact me again. However, they didn't. Not right away, anyhow. I believe it was also how they processed it. I'd never taken such a firm stand before. I spent the first few weeks settling into my new cottage. I unloaded methodically, ensuring that everything had its proper place. The kitchen was just spacious enough for me to cook comfortably, and the living room, with its warm wood floors and lovely natural light, made me feel at home. The sunroom became my small sanctuary, the ideal location to unwind and read or have a cup of coffee in the morning. I planted herbs and flowers in the garden and watched them gently bloom. It was a modest existence, but it was mine. Nonetheless, the stillness between myself and my family started to chew at me. It was not that I missed their incessant interference, far from it, but rather the concept of family. The type of family I had always desired, supportive and loving, with no manipulation or control. Every now and then I would think, is this really worth it? But I'd made my decision. I was not going to go back. Not now. And then the messages began again. The first came from Sophie, of course. "Emma, we need talk. Mom and Dad are really upset about this. You realize you're pushing them too far, right? It's not only about the house. You're tearing our family apart." I looked at the message for a long time. I knew exactly what it was. Guilt. Sophie was always adept at making me feel bad for standing up for myself. I wasn't sure how she did it, but it always worked. But this time, I was not going to fall for it. Not again. I typed an answer and then deleted it. I did not owe her an explanation. "I'm sorry you feel that way, but I won't change my mind. This is the life I desire, and I'm not looking for your approval anymore." I pressed send and felt the stress leave my shoulders. It was hardly the most eloquent response, but it was genuine. I wasn't asking for permission to live my life anymore. Then Dad called. He never called me directly unless it was a serious matter. I considered not responding, but I knew it would only make everything worse if I did. "Can we talk, Emma?" His voice was calm and somewhat exhausted. There was no rage, just the disappointment I had always dreaded. "Okay, Dad." "What up?" "We're just concerned," he said slowly, seeking for the appropriate words. "You are making a significant adjustment. We are your parents. We just want the best for you." I closed my eyes and felt the weight of his words. This was not the first time I'd heard it. They always assumed they knew what was best for me, but they never asked what I wanted. "I know you're concerned, but I'm not a kid anymore, Dad," I said, my voice steady. "I won't spend my life for you or Sophie. I need to do it for myself. I need my own space to be myself." There was stillness on the other end for a long time, and for a split second I wondered whether I had gone too far. Then he spoke again. "I just don't want you to feel alone," he explained, his voice breaking slightly. "You are family. You always will be. And I just don't understand why you want to be so far away from us." I felt an ache in my chest, but remained strong. "I am not alone, Dad. I'm simply doing this for me. It's time to live my life on my own terms. I hope you understand." The conversation concluded awkwardly. Dad did not yell or try to push me to change my views, but I knew he wasn't really getting it. And maybe he never will. I didn't want to feel guilty anymore. I'd spent so many years conforming to their expectations, trying to be who they wanted me to be. But now that I was really living for myself, it felt like a success and a loss all at once. That night, as I sat on my porch, gazing out at the garden, I realized something. What's with this silence? What's with this remoteness from my family? It was not something that had occurred overnight. It had been growing for years. It had started with the simple things. The way they always talked over me. The way they always prioritized Sophie. The way my needs came second to theirs. But I'd let it happen. I'd always been the one to keep quiet and avoid conflict. But not anymore. Perhaps they did not grasp my decision. Perhaps they never will. But that was fine. I needed to be okay with it. I spent the following few days contemplating. It wasn't that I didn't love my family, or that I didn't want to be near them. I did. But I'd spent so much time being someone else's vision of what I should be that I'd forgotten who I was. This house, this cottage, was my opportunity to figure it out. I started filling my days with things that were important to me. I resumed my painting pastime, which I had abandoned for several years. I planted a little vegetable garden and experimented with herbs and greens. The silence was no longer a threat. It was a refuge. I also started to live a life free of the cacophony of my past. I joined a few local groups, including one for gardening and another for hiking. I met folks who respected my limits and expected nothing from me but a genuine connection. One afternoon, I was sitting at a neighborhood cafe when I met someone who changed my perspective on the entire scenario. Claire was one of the neighbors. She was older, in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and a chuckle that made you feel as if you'd known her for years, even though you'd only just met. She was a writer who lived alone in a charming little cottage up the road, and after a few conversations, we became friends. "Emma, I am so thrilled I ran into you today," Claire said, smiling as she approached. "I had been wanting to invite you to my book club. We meet on Thursday afternoons and would love to welcome you. It's a fantastic set of people, and I believe you'd really enjoy it." I grinned, feeling warm in my chest. "I'd love that, Claire. I could use something like that." As we talked longer, I discovered something. These folks saw me for who I truly was, despite without knowing my family or past. Not as someone's daughter or sister, but as Emma, a person with goals, passions, and a future. That night, following my chat with Claire, I sat back in my cottage and gazed out at the darkening sky. For the first time in a long time, I felt completely at ease. I had made the correct decision. I did not need their approval. I didn't have to be a part of their agenda anymore. I was living for myself, which was more than enough. Maybe, just maybe, they'll come to see it one day. Months passed, and the silence between me and my family persisted, but I no longer felt the weight of it. My time at the cottage was all I had hoped for, and more. I no longer feared the silence. Instead, it became a source of comfort. I had accepted being alone, and unexpectedly I was not lonely. I focused on my work and activities, gradually creating a life that was genuinely mine. My modest garden thrived, so I launched a side company selling homemade herbal teas. My neighbors became friends, and Claire's book club became a weekly highlight. Sophie unexpectedly sent me a message. She stated that she missed me and wanted to talk. After all of the tension, I was hesitant but consented. We met at a cafe, and for the first time in months we spoke freely. She acknowledged that she did not understand my decision, but she respected it. We didn't resolve everything during that chat, but it was a start. I left that encounter feeling lighter, knowing that the bridge I had torched might not have been fully gone. Perhaps with time, we can rebuild. For the time being, I was at peace. I lived for myself. And that's all I needed. Story 2. Because my sister's life is more important than mine, my mother insisted that I donate my kidney to her. The test results, however, are startling. She now regrets asking me to be a donor after I told a few people about it. "Hello, this is Amy. Just a typical college student. However, I have a tale to share, one that occasionally still keeps me up at night. But I must take you back to the beginning in order to truly comprehend how everything went wrong. When we lost Dad, I was 14. My sister was just 9 years old. It went by so quickly. He was on his way home from work one minute. The following day, we received a call regarding a vehicle collision. He was struck by a drunk driver who had run a red light. His wounds were simply too great, but he managed to survive for 3 days in the hospital. Mom was devastated when Dad passed away. I recall her telling them she would never get married again while sitting in the living room of her father's parents' house, tears running down her cheeks. No other man will ever be like John. Throughout it all, my grandparents' dad's parents were incredible. They made sure we had everything we needed and allowed us to stay in their home. Mom was not even required to work. To care for us, they sent her money each month. However, that's when things with Mom started to change. She treated my sister and me differently, and while it was subtle at first, it became obvious over time. For example, my sister would buy 5 new outfits for our back-to-school shopping trip, while I was told to use last year's clothes or to eat dinner. She always gives my sister the last cookie or the larger piece of chicken. The worst time was Christmas. My sister would receive a ton of gifts, but I would only receive 1 or 2. "Can I play in the school band, Mom?" I was eager to learn how to play the flute, so I asked once. "Oh, honey, we just can't afford instrument rental right now," she said. But the very next week, when my sister mentioned wanting to take dance classes, Mom signed her up immediately. naturally. "Sweetie, we need to nurture your talents." Even with simple things like when we both ask for help with homework, Mom would drop everything to help my sister while telling me to figure it out on my own. Or when we both achieved something at school, my sister would get taken out for ice cream for getting a B while my straight A's barely got a good job. The weird thing was, I learned to live with it. Maybe because my sister was so different from Mom, she'd always try to share her new things with me or stick up for me when she could. That's what made it bearable, I guess, knowing that even if Mom played favorites, my sister never did. We stayed close despite everything. I loved watching her practice, her dance routines, and she'd sit and listen to me play the cheap plastic recorder I bought with my allowance money since I couldn't join band. We were a team, me and her, no matter what Mom did or said. I was 16 when my sister turned 11, and that's when everything changed again. What started as routine blood work during a regular checkup turned into our worst nightmare. Sarah was diagnosed with kidney failure. I still remember sitting in the sterile hospital waiting room while the doctor explained everything to Mom. The words felt like they were coming from underwater. Chronic kidney disease treatment options, long-term care plans. Sarah, my vibrant little sister who loved to dance and could make anyone smile, was suddenly a patient. The diagnosis brought us even closer together. While Mom spent hours researching treatments and talking to doctors, I'd sit with Sarah during her appointments, playing card games and making up silly stories to distract her. We'd laugh together about the awful hospital food and make plans for all the things we do. Once she felt better, Mom barely noticed I was there. She'd spend hours discussing Sarah's treatment with the doctors, completely forgetting I was in the room. When she did acknowledge me, it was usually just to send me to get something for Sarah, or to tell me to be quieter. But I understood Sarah was sick. She needed the attention more than I did. Before I knew it, I was 18 and graduating high school. My grades were good enough to get me a partial scholarship to a college in another state. Grandma and Grandpa stepped in again, offering to cover the rest of my tuition and expenses. Mom barely made it to the ceremony. She was late because Sarah had a doctor's appointment that morning. She didn't even stay for pictures, rushing off to get Sarah to another appointment. But again, I couldn't blame her. Sarah's health had to come first. College was like stepping into another world. Suddenly, I was hundreds of miles away from the family drama, making new friends, taking interesting classes, and finally feeling like I could breathe. I called Sarah and my grandparents, regularly sharing stories about my classes and campus life. Sarah would tell me about her treatments and how she was feeling, while Grandma and Grandpa kept me updated on everything happening at home. Mom rarely called when she did. It was usually to tell me about Sarah's latest test results or to remind me to call my sister more often. She never asked about my classes or how I was doing, but that was okay. I was used to it by now. I was in the middle of my junior year when everything fell apart. It was just after midnight when my phone rang, Mom's number lighting up the screen. I felt sick to my stomach. She never called this late, Amy. Her voice was raw, hysterical. Sarah's in the hospital. Her kidneys, they've completely failed. She's on a hemodialysis machine. I could hear her weeping through the phone. You need to come home right now. The next morning was a whirl of emails to lecturers and hasty packing. I managed to obtain a leave of absence, authorized and purchased a train ticket home. As the scenery flew by my window, all I could think of was Sarah laying in a hospital bed waiting for me to come home. Mom was waiting for me at the train station, pacing back and forth on the platform. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Her hair was disheveled, her clothing crumpled, and there were heavy bags under her eyes. As soon as she saw me, she grabbed my arm and started pushing me toward the parking lot. The entire car trip home was filled with Mom's unending stream of remarks regarding Sarah's illness. How pale she appeared during the operations, how much weight she lost, how she could scarcely eat since the drugs made her nauseous, how her arms were bruised by the needles. Every detail made my stomach turn like a dagger. Amy, she's so frail. With her knuckles white on the steering wheel, Mom continued to speak. My kid is going through a lot of pain. Hemodialysis isn't a cure, but it's keeping her alive. A genuine kidney is what she needs. She must. As soon as we arrived into our driveway, Mom was silent. She did not exit the vehicle, but she did switch off the engine. Rather, she looked at me, and I saw a shift in her countenance. Something harsher took the place of the weeping, anxious expression. Colder. She responded, abruptly firm and demanding, "You can save her. You have to donate your kidney to her." I sat still. I wasn't surprised by the proposal. Naturally, I had thought about being a donor. It was the manner in which she spoke. It felt as if she was telling me to give her mother something. I spoke slowly. But what about the dangers? How would my health fare if I? She interrupted me, laughing harshly. Sarah's life and well-being are more significant than your own. In a situation like this, how can you even think about yourself? Her remarks struck me like a physical blow with their brutality. I was unable to think or breathe. I sprinted into the home after stumbling out of the automobile. My face is already wet with tears. I could hear my mother yelling behind me. I threw myself into the bed after locking myself in my former bedroom. I sobbed all night long, smothering my cries in my pillow to keep my mother from hearing and shouting at me. My head was full with questions. Was there anything I could do? If I refused, what would happen to Sarah? If I answered yes, what would happen to me? If I didn't, would Mom ever forgive me? Mom was sipping her coffee at the kitchen table quietly, as if nothing had occurred, when I eventually came down for breakfast the following morning. "We need to have you checked as quickly as possible to make sure you're an eligible donor," she remarked, looking up when I stepped in. "To make the appointments, I'll give the hospital a call today." I held my coffee mug hard while I tried to speak clearly. "I haven't made up my mind to donate my kidney to Sarah yet, Mom." After a little period of stillness, Mom lost it. Hot coffee splattered across the table when she slammed her coffee mug down. "You're still undecided." She let out a scream. Her face is flushed. "What needs to be decided? Your sister is in critical condition." She got up, her chair scratching the floor, and I winced. "Don't you, Mama, please, you callous, self-centered girl." Now she was pacing and making frantic gestures. "Do you wish to murder your sister? To get all the attention for yourself, you want her to die." From the counter, she picked up a plate and tossed it into the sink. I jumped at the sound of china breaking. "Because you are too self-centered to assist your sister, you will kill her." It was more than I could handle. I was scarcely able to function since my hands were trembling so much. However, I made it to my room by running upstairs somehow. As my mother continued to scream from downstairs, I retrieved my still-filled bag and packed in a few more items from my dresser. "You return here. We're not done discussing this." However, I was finished. I dashed out the front door past my furious mother and down the stairs. She was still screaming about how self-centered I was, how I was murdering my sister, and how I was a terrible daughter, and I could hear her pursuing me. I simply ran till her voice was no longer audible. The distance to my grandparents' house was just a few blocks. I didn't even finish knocking before Grandma answered the door. "My dear, what's the matter?" I started crying again, and she drew me into an embrace. Behind her, Grandpa showed up with a worried expression. They seated me in their comfortable living room, where our family had shared many joyous times. Grandma prepared hot cocoa. She used to prepare genuine hot chocolate with melted chocolate and warm milk when I was a child, but not the instant sort. I told them all about my mother's demand for my kidney while sobbing and trembling while holding the steaming cup. When I told her that I needed time to consider, she became angry and shouted terrible things. Grandpa responded quietly. "Of course we knew about Sarah's condition. Her medical expenditures have been covered by us. However, this," he gave a head shake. "My dear, my hand was taken by Grandma. You must make this choice. No one has the right to make such a demand of you, not even your mother. Your body makes the decision." In my pocket, my phone continued to vibrate. The screen repeatedly showed Mom's name. Get tested right away. You're needed by your sister. Quit being so self-centered. It's unbelievable that you're harming your own sister-like way. The following morning, I switched off my phone. We heard the front door crash open while we were eating breakfast. Mom stormed like a hurricane into the dining room. Her eyes were ablaze, her hair wild. "You're on your way home now?" She pointed at me and demanded. "To get you tested, we're heading to the hospital. She is also your daughter." Grandma wrapped her arm over my shoulders and said that, "Even for Sarah's sake, you cannot make her give up a kidney." "Hell no, I can't." The tone of Mom's voice became more hysterical. "She must do it. What if she doesn't?" Her eyes were steely and frigid as she turned to face me. "You're dead to me if you don't do this. You get it? You will no longer be my daughter." She whirled around and rushed out before anybody could react, slamming the door so forcefully that it rocked Grandma's china cabinet. The abrupt silence was broken by the sound of her car's tires screeching on the pavement and the engine revving. I made the decision to pay Sarah a visit at the hospital that afternoon. Before escorting me to Sarah's room, the station nurse made me wash my hands well and gave me a medical mask. It was like entering a different universe when you walked into that immaculate hospital room. The air was filled with the constant beep of monitors, and my sister appeared to be connected to every machine in the world by tubes. Sarah's face lit up when she saw me, even though she looked so tiny in that large hospital bed. "Amy." Her smile was as bright as ever, but her voice was weak. "You arrived." In order to avoid disturbing any of the wires or tubes, I sat carefully in the chair next to her bed. I came, of course, squirt. Make sure you're not making the nurses crazy, someone. For a long time, we sat there discussing everything and nothing. Her preferred nurse, my classes at college, the awful hospital cuisine. Then her face became serious, Mom informed me. "I would like to ask you to be my donor," she said quietly. My throat constricted. "Sarah?" "No. Pay attention." She made a move for my hand. Her fingertips felt icy against mine. "You would never be asked to do it by me, Amy. It must be your decision, just yours." I clasped her hand while tears filled my eyes. While my mother was at home yelling at me for being selfish, here she was, hooked up to machines, battling for her life, and still worrying about how I felt. Sarah was defending my freedom of choice. I decided after seeing her laying there, both courageous and ill, I'd want to be tested. I said, "I want to know whether I can assist, not because my mother is pressuring me." It was as though the previous several days had never occurred when my mother learnt that I had chosen to get tested. "You're doing the right thing, Amy," she said as she hurried to give me a hug while weeping. "The appropriate action." After returning home from my grandparents' place, I spent the following few weeks undergoing one test after another: psychological testing, tissue typing, and blood samples. The process. Mom made my favorite meals and inquired about my day, and she was suddenly quite kind. In some respects, it was worse than having the mother I'd always desired. The doctor finally called us in to go over the results after what seemed like an eternity of waiting. In his office, Mom and I sat with test results and documents piled high on the desk between us. He looked uneasy as he adjusted his spectacles. "Regretfully, I have some shocking news." He started to shuffle the papers. "These tests indicate that Amy is not a suitable donor for Sarah." Mom bent over. "What? Why not? We can do further testing. More exams aren't the point." Gently, the doctor intervened. "Well, the degree of relation between Amy and Sarah is the problem. It isn't enough for a transplant." In the doctor's office, I sat there attempting to understand what he was saying. There was a minor whirling sensation in the room. "I don't get it." Slowly, I said, "What does degree of kinship imply to you specifically? Could you elaborate?" The doctor looked from Mom to me and cleared his throat. "Your bloodwork's genetic markers indicate that you and Sarah are not complete siblings. There is just one parent that you have in common." I glanced at my mother. She had become white. Her knuckles were the same color as her face when she gripped the chair's arms. "Mom?" My voice was hardly audible above a whisper. What is he discussing? How can this be? Her chair nearly toppled over as she sprang to her feet. This is irrelevant. All of this is irrelevant. Before one of us can speak another word, we'll locate another donor. The office door slammed behind her as she ran out. After a little pause, the doctor resumed his calm speech. "According to the tests, Miss Mitchell, you and Sarah have separate dads even if you have the same mother. The man who reared you is not your sister's biological father." The word struck me like a punch to the body. Distinct dads. My father is not the same as my sister's biological father. Dad had been cheated on by Mom, had a liaison, got married to my father, and became pregnant with Sarah. It was a blur on the way home. Mom was seated at the kitchen table as I entered the house, but I can't even recall getting into my car or driving along the well-known streets. In front of her was a half-empty glass and a bottle of cognac. We must speak. My voice trembled as I spoke. About how you betrayed your father and cheated on him. Without even glancing at me, she took another gulp from her glass. "You have no business about it. What difference does it make now, anyway? You are of no use. Not even your sister can be helped." I gaped at her in shock. "My father was my business. You also betrayed him. You were pregnant with Sarah after having an affair. You are solely to blame for this. If you weren't unfaithful, I could have assisted Sarah if we shared a father." The kitchen reverberated with the sound of the smack. Mom had moved before I even realized it. I stayed still as she rushed up the stairs to my room, leaving my cheeks scorched where her palm had hit me. Shortly after, she returned with my bag, which I had just begun to unpack after returning from my grandparents' house, and tossed it at my feet. "Leave now!" She let out a scream. The cognac made her sentences a little slurred. "Anyhow, I never loved you. You ought to have done it. It should have been you who became ill, not Sarah, my darling." As her words took hold, I stood there with my palm firmly placed on my burning cheek. Never showed me affection. It ought to have been me. I had always suspected the truth. Lastly, without a word, set out. I grabbed my bag. Even though Mom was still yelling, her words had lost all significance. I interrupted her in the middle of her tirade as I stepped out the front door and locked it behind me. I ended up back to my grandparents' house with tears in my eyes. I was unable to speak when Grandma answered the door this time. I just sobbed as I collapsed into her arms. Through hiccuping gasps, they seated me in the kitchen. I filled them in on everything, including the test results, Mom's affair, Sarah's lack of paternity, Mom's harsh remarks, and how she had ejected me. Grandpa sat still, his coffee going cold before him, as Grandma's face hardened with every syllable. There was an overwhelming quiet in the kitchen after I was done. Grandma firmly stated, "We'll take care of this," and she grabbed the phone first thing tomorrow morning. She also did. Grandma put the phone on speaker so Grandpa could hear Marie while I was eating breakfast the following day. "It's Ellen," Grandma spoke in an icy tone. "Gather your belongings. You must get out of the house." Through the speaker, Mom's voice crackled. "What? What are you discussing? We own that house," Grandma went on. "And you who have mistreated our granddaughter and deceived our son. You no longer have the right to reside there. It just happened once." A cry emerged in Mom's voice. "An accident occurred. I cherished John. Yes, I did. I also adore Amy. You must trust me. It was sufficient to do so once." Grandpa's voice was shaking with rage as he said, "This family was annihilated by one instance. Please." Now Mom was weeping. "Where are we going? How is Sarah being treated? The cost of Sarah's care may be discontinued." Coldly, Grandma said, "After all, she's not our grandchild." For a second, I thought my heart had stopped. Grandma went on, nevertheless. "We won't do it, though. Marie, we're not as mean as you. Since Sarah is an innocent kid in need of assistance, we will continue to cover her medical expenses. But you You must get out of the house. Get a job and get a place of your own. You've been standing on your own 2 feet for a very long time. I went to see Sarah in the hospital the next day. She appeared much more diminutive, if it was feasible. She smiled weakly at me as I entered. She murmured gently, "Hey, I suppose we now understand why you are unable to donate to me. Distinct fathers. Who would have guessed? Correct? Pay attention to me." I gave her hand a squeeze. Between us, nothing has changed. I still consider you my sister. I still adore you, too. Grandma and Grandpa will continue to assist with your care. Sarah, we will locate a donor for you. I swear. Really? She started crying, despite the fact that I'm not actually there. Really? I forcefully shut her off. Family is more than simply blood. It has to do with love. You're also my sister, regardless of the results of any tests. 3 months have passed since everything went wrong. Even so, there are moments when it seems like years. Now that I'm back at college, I'm attempting to concentrate on my coursework and establish a normal life. The house is still occupied by Mom. Grandparents agreed to let her remain, for Sarah's sake, not for hers. To get to dialysis, she needs a ride. When I questioned their choice, Grandpa gave an explanation, and when she's not feeling well, someone has to be there. 3 times a week, Sarah visits the hemodialysis facility. She's tough, but it's harsh on her physique. Even while I occasionally detect the weariness in her voice, she never complains when we speak on the phone, which we do virtually every day. However, everything changed last week. For the first time in months, Sarah sounded excited when she called me. "Amy!" She essentially yelled into the telephone. A donor was located. The doctor just informed us that this individual was present. Despite becoming an organ donor, he passed away in an accident. I'm a match too. Now she was weeping. Tears of joy. "Amy, I'm getting a kidney. I may even recover." I felt a rush of relief go over me and I started weeping. After all that had happened to us. At last, some positive news. I'd like to see Sarah right now. Through our grandparents, I make the arrangements. We spend time together when she visits their home. They're not with their mother. We get hot chocolate from Grandma. Remains the actual type. Additionally, Sarah laughs until she needs to defend herself from her grandfather's awful jokes. Even though they are aware that Sarah is not their real granddaughter, they nevertheless show her great care. When I brought it up, Grandma once said, "She's just a child. She is not at blame for any of this." But last week, when Sarah had left for home, they did take me aside. Grandpa sat me down in his office and said, "We need to talk about something serious about our will." He raised his hand as I began to object. "You must be aware of this. Everything we own, including our money in the house. Amy, it's going to you. Just you. However, Sarah," I started. "It is not Sarah who is our grandchild," Grandma said softly. "But once it's yours, you may use it whatever you choose. If you would like to tell your sister, you will have to decide that." What they were actually saying made sense to me. Mom was being punished, not Sarah. Mom, speaking of her, gave me a call yesterday. Something compelled me to pick up Amy even though I nearly didn't respond. She spoke in a tiny, uncertain voice. "I need your assistance. Could you? Are you able to speak with your grandparents? Request permission to occupy the residence permanently. If you ask them, I know." "No," I spoke firmly. "Final. Amy, please. Your mommy is me." I acknowledged that I made mistakes. I interrupted her. "You betrayed your father. You spent years lying to everyone. You acted as though I didn't exist. I was never loved by you. That is untrue." I ended the call. I could forgive her one day, perhaps one day. Her treachery will no longer hurt as much. Not today, though. I'm thinking about Sarah's impending transplant today, on my academic work, on creating a life free from my mother's decisions. Story 3. For Christmas, my sister received a lavish vacation from my parents. My mother smiled and remarked, "You are the pride of our family." I opened my present, which included a housekeeper name tag and frayed cleaning supplies. My dad went out. "For you, this is sufficient." My sister laughed. After packing my things, I departed. My parents called in a panic a few days later. "You're where? Return?" A chilly December wind blew through Boston's peaceful suburbs. The Wilsons' White Newton mansion appeared to be the ideal representation of a wealthy family from the outside. A vision of perfection was created by the well-kept grass, the symmetrical black ornamental windows, and the simple Christmas decorations at the door. Invisible tensions were becoming deeper every day within the house, despite its lovely appearance. "Mom, you need to take your blood pressure medicine now." When Jennifer Wilson got home from work, she started her day by taking care of her mother's prescriptions. One of her daily responsibilities was to take care of her mother, who had diabetes and high blood pressure. Working as a senior manager at a large accounting firm, it was her responsibility as the eldest daughter to discreetly manage every part of keeping the family home in order. "Yes," Margaret said apathetically, her gaze fixed on the screen of her smartphone. Rebecca's Instagram feed captured her attention. Her younger daughter, a flamboyant and successful luxury real estate agent, captured her mother's attention. "Today, I purchased dinner ingredients from Whole Foods. I took care to adhere to my father's sodium limits. Jennifer, take a look at this." Rebecca seems to have closed another wonderful property deal. Margaret, whose face was filled with pride for her younger daughter, cut Jennifer off mid-sentence. Jennifer is silently making her way to the kitchen. Because of her father, David's recent increase in forgetfulness, meal planning has become more crucial. She started making dinner in silence. The doorbell rang. "Please pardon me. Is this the home of Wilson?" At the unknown male voice, Jennifer dropped her knife. "Indeed, it is." "Regarding, in fact, Miss has passed away." Jennifer quickly stepped outside and lowered her voice. "Please, could you keep this from my parents? If you could tell me the amount." This was the third time cleaning up after her sister's hidden gambling addiction was always Jennifer's responsibility. She let out a deep internal sigh. Her bank balance would decrease yet again at night. Facing an Excel sheet in her room, Jennifer was keeping the household accounts, property taxes, her parents' medical expenses, house maintenance costs, and her sister's debts. Deep fatigue showed in her eyes as she stared at the numbers. The screen of her smartphone came to life. It was a message from her workplace colleague, Michael Thompson. "Are you working late again?" His kind words warmed her heart a little. "Yes, as usual." As she typed her reply, Jennifer looked out the window. The neighbors' Christmas decorations cast a soft light into the night sky. Christmas Eve morning found the Wilson mansion bustling with activity from early on through the large living room windows. The accumulated snow sparkled in the morning sun. Jennifer was putting the finishing touches on decorations she had prepared over the past week. The 8-foot tree, adorned with traditional ornaments, was perfectly arranged like a boutique window display in Greenwich Village. Cherished family stockings passed down through generations, hung above the fireplace, and colorful poinsettias decorated every corner of the room. From the kitchen wafted the savory aroma of honey-baked ham that had been prepared since the previous day. The green bean casserole was already waiting in the oven for the perfect degree of doneness. The table was set with an Irish linen tablecloth inherited from her grandmother, elegantly laid out with her mother's prized bone china. "Perfect," Jennifer whispered softly. For 28 years, she had pursued perfection for this day. But this year, something felt different. Something was nagging at the back of her mind. Nat King Calls the Christmas Song began playing quietly in the background. It was her father David's favorite song. "Jenny, this is wonderful." Her father, who had come down the stairs, was surprisingly well-dressed. He was wearing a new Brooks Brothers suit and even had on an expensive watch he rarely used. Her mother, Margaret, had also applied her makeup more carefully than usual and changed into a gorgeous dress. "I wonder if Rebecca will be arriving soon." There was undisguised anticipation in her mother's voice. At that moment, they heard the sound of a luxury car engine followed by a honk. "Oh, she must be here." Her mother hurried to the front door. Jennifer remained in the kitchen, making final preparations. From the living room came the sounds of her parents' excited voices welcoming her sister. "Welcome home, Rebecca. What a lovely car. Is it new?" "Indeed. It's a celebration for last month's closing. It's a 2025 Range Rover model." There was a touch of pride in Rebecca's voice. She entered the living room holding a Hermes Birkin bag, her Louboutin heels clicking on the floor. "My, this tree. Who decorated it?" "Jennifer did. She does it every year. It's a bit old-fashioned, isn't it? These days, celebrities hire professional stylists." Rebecca sniffed dismissively as taking out her smartphone. "Oh, absolutely. I must show everyone my achievements this year." She brought out her iPad and began a spectacular presentation. Luxurious home photographs arrived one after another. Multi-million-dollar purchases, photos with celebs, scenes from expensive parties. Their parents watched fascinated. Sales rose 200% from last year. Top sales in the company. Amazing. That's our daughter. Their parents' applause rang across the room. No one noticed Jennifer's presence as she discreetly put the finishing touches on the dinner in the kitchen. "Oh, that reminds me," Rebecca suddenly replied, as if just recalling something. "Next month I'm on a 3-week Caribbean cruise, taking a break from the workplace." "How lovely." Mom's eyes glistened. "Are you certain about the money, though?" David inquired anxiously. "Naturally. I have a lot of money saved up." Jennifer unconsciously stopped when she remembered the debt her sister had paid off only a week prior. But no one addressed that. It's time for gifts now. With excitement, Mother made the announcement. Around the tree, everyone gathered. After putting out the last plates, Jennifer silently entered the circle for Rebecca first. Mother brought out a huge envelope. There was a ticket inside for the Royal Caribbean Luxury Cruise Ship's top suite room. "You are our pride and delight." Mother smiled broadly as she embraced Rebecca. "You may now enjoy a fantastic holiday." Rebecca squealed with joy and started using her smartphone to snap pictures of the cruise ticket right away. The tone of Jennifer's father then altered. He brought out a huge paper bag from behind him. "This is your gift." The paper bag included a name tag and a collection of old cleaning goods, including rags, a dustpan, and a broom. It read housekeeping. "Shouldn't this be sufficient? I've even included a name tag for a housekeeper that is ideal for you." The father laughed aloud. She heard her sister snicker cruelly. Mother remarked in a tone that seemed very natural, "This suits you best." The mood in the room froze. Jennifer got to her feet without a word. She carefully placed the cleaning supplies on the table after picking them up. "Thank you." Her voice was very calm. "I'm going to take a vacation." Jennifer went to her room upstairs. From downstairs, the sound of the family's laughter could still be heard. She silently entered her wardrobe and took out a luggage she had prepared in preparation. The necessities had already been packed: certificates, bank records, and passports. For this day, everything had been ready. It was snowing again outside the window. On her desk, Jennifer put an envelope. "Thank you for the 28 years," was all that was written. She went out the front door, and nobody saw her. Only the Christmas tree lights illuminated her back before getting into the taxi. She took one final look at the house, where her family's vibrant voice is still reverberating. She slipped into the seat and told the driver where she was going. Jennifer shut her eyes. Through the snow-covered streets, the taxi departed in silence. "Your new home is here." Michael pulled out the keys of a historic brick apartment building located in Boston's Back Bay region. It was a 5-story structure in a peaceful residential area. With its well-kept little courtyard and quiet neighborhood, the old, solid exterior was a good setting for Jennifer to start her new life. "Thank you." She quietly accepted the keys. The room was pleasantly light, with wide windows overlooking the historic town. Much though there wasn't much furniture, it seemed much cozier. "I appreciate all of your hard work over the past week." Warm consideration filled Michael's voice. Yes, it had been a long week. Workplace emergency department transfer processes, bank account changes, and getting ready for a new life. Everything needed to be completed swiftly, but steadily. "How is your family doing?" "They haven't noticed yet," Jennifer answered while gazing out the window, as she had expected. As usual, her absence had gone unnoticed by her family. They were presumably still enjoying family time centered around Rebecca for several days following Christmas. However, that item didn't endure long. A notification that the home phone bill was past due was the first indication. Jennifer had failed to make the payment that would have been automatically processed. Then her dad saw, "Where? Where are my prescription drugs?" The fact that David Wilson's prescription drugs were missing from their designated spot perplexed him. The weekly medication schedule, with specific times for taking each tablet, was no longer there. Actually, Jennifer had been handling everything. Margaret was unable to stick to her diabetic diet. It had been Jennifer who had evaluated the nutritional balance of every meal, calculated calories, and adjusted salt levels. Day by day, the extent of her presence grew more apparent. "Where are you, Jennifer?" For the first time, there was concern in Mother's voice. Her daughter was absent from the normal church services on the weekends. Concerned neighbors started to inquire. "Have you not recently seen your older daughter?" "Yes. The house no longer appears to be as well maintained." "How is your mother doing?" Slowly but slowly, rumors began to circulate. Then, 10 days after Jennifer's departure, the pivotal moment came. Mrs. Thomas from next door hurried in a panic early in the morning. "Mr. Wilson." Margaret Wilson, your wife, had passed out on the garden steps. She had tried to go alone to her routine checkup, which Jennifer would normally have accompanied her to, and had grown dizzy. The ambulance's siren reverberated throughout the peaceful neighborhood. She has dangerously high blood pressure. She also appears to have uncontrolled diabetes. At Newton Wellesley Hospital, the physician's voice was severe. "Where are the relatives?" "We attempted to call her sister, but were unsuccessful." At the nurse's report, David let out a long sigh. In truth, Rebecca had gone 3 days ago. She had paid in her Caribbean cruise tickets and fled. Meanwhile, they had observed something strange at Jennifer's new job. "Miss Wilson, there's an inquiry concerning Miss Rebecca Wilson from someone claiming to be from a real estate firm." Jennifer briefly closed her eyes. "Please put them through." The voice on the other end was her sister's company supervisor. In actuality, Rebecca Wilson's misappropriation of customer money has revealed a significant issue. The entire sum was astounding, and a large portion had vanished into gaming. If you are aware of your sister's location, Jennifer, however, was also unaware. That night, laying on her bed in her new apartment, Jennifer glanced at her smartphone screen, unread her parents' messages. Her sister's Instagram had suddenly been deleted. "Are you all right?" Michael sent a message. "Indeed. Just a few thoughts." Jennifer glanced out the window as she composed her response. It had started snowing again. Her phone rang at that very moment. "Jennifer?" The voice of her mother was shaking. "You're where?" "Please return." That voice had a desperation she had never heard before. She could also hear her father's agitated voice in the background. "Come home, please." On the other end of the phone, her mother was in tears. Jennifer hung up quietly. Then she texted Michael one more. "I want you to investigate a few topics tomorrow." She understood that the moment had come to learn the whole truth. Her mother's actual state of health, the depth of her sister's indebtedness, and the degree of her father's cognitive impairment. Early morning silence enveloped Newton Wellesley Hospital's waiting area. Jennifer was going over the investigative findings that Michael had sent her. It described the actual circumstances facing her family following her departure. "Ma'am, it's visiting time." She noticed her father, David, at the end of the hallway as she looked up at the nurse's voice. He was obviously worn out from taking care of her ailing mother every day. "Jennifer." Her father's eyes widened. His face, nevertheless, lacked the majesty and haughtiness of earlier. He was only an elderly, weary man. "Sit down, Dad." Jennifer opened the report in silence. "Everything has been verified by me here." Her father's diagnosis was on the first page. Alzheimer's disease in its early stages. It seems that the symptoms had started 2 years prior. "Why didn't you say something about this? I didn't want to cause you any anxiety." Her dad cast a downward glance. However, that was merely a pretext. In actuality, he simply hadn't wanted to recognize his dependence on his eldest daughter. Her mother's medical records were on the following pages. "I didn't realize how bad Mom's illness was. Diabetic nephropathy progression, stress on her heart as a result of her depression diagnosis, and hypertension." The months since Jennifer had been gone had seen a sharp decline in everything. Her primary care physician called us. Her dad's voice faltered. "Your mom needs a lot of attention. She needs a family member by her side all the time." They were informed of this, but Rebecca was nowhere to be seen. Her father alone could never manage her mother's care. "How about the cash?" When Jennifer opened the next page, her father turned away. Notices of foreclosure, mountains of unpaid bills, and bank statements. Rebecca was the primary cause of the family's financial collapse. Her father was able to get the words out. The issues facing her sister were more severe than she had thought. Over $2 million in customer deposits were stolen in total. Most of it had disappeared into online casinos. Debt had been the foundation of the ostentatious lifestyle that was shared on social media. Her father brought out a quivering letter. Actually, this arrived yesterday. Rebecca had written a letter of confession. "To my mother, father, and older sister. I am the worst person. I've lost everything. I embezzled business money, lost everything to gambling, and lost my family's confidence. However, my behavior towards you, big sister, was the most repulsive. To be honest, I've always envied you. Who could be flawless, take care of the family, and succeed at work? I looked down on you and put on airs to satisfy my own void. I'm currently at a Las Vegas recovery center. I intend to confess to all of my offenses and give myself into the police. I can only make this atonement. I'm sincerely sorry." There was a profound hush in the hospital room after the letter was read. Her father shouted out in a raspy voice, "Jennifer!" We were such idiots at the time. Her mother opened her eyes slightly as she lay in bed. "Am I dreaming, Jennifer? It's actually me, Mom." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. "I apologize for how I treated you." At that moment, the room was filled with unspoken apologies. The phone rang on Jennifer's phone. Michael had left a message. "Your parents' neighbors want to start a support group. Everyone is concerned about them." The picture of the household phone bill appeared next. It had a paid mark. "It seems that the neighbors divided the expense. They were all aware of how much you have been providing for your family over the years." Jennifer exhaled deeply. She saw the last 28 years as if they were a kaleidoscope, the day she had spent with her family since she was a little girl. Perhaps they hadn't been in vain after all, she gently started. "Let's have a proper conversation about what happens next." There were spring birds fluttering around outside the window. The end of winter was definitely approaching. First Dad's dementia treatment, then considering a care facility for Mom, and she took a breath. How to balance this with my new life? Her father and mother nodded softly. They had a chance to listen now. But there are restrictions. Jennifer spoke quietly but firmly. From now on as equals. No more one-sided sacrifices from anyone. The morning sunshine flowing into the hospital room marked the beginning of a new day. That evening, while traveling to her parents' house in Michael's car, Jennifer was thinking, there are no ideal answers, but if they approach one another honestly and take it one step at a time, they'll be able to find their way, no doubt. When the vehicle halted in front of her former house, neighbors had gathered. Everyone welcomed her with warm grins. "Welcome home, Jennifer." At those remarks, she gave a small nod. "I've returned home." 6 months later, Jennifer was working on her laptop while drinking coffee at her window in her former Back Bay flat. The screen displayed a care schedule for her parents' home. "How does this appear?" Michael glanced over from beside her. Over the course of these 6 months, their friendship had progressively become closer. Indeed, during the week and on the weekends, I will visit my parents' home. Next door was Mrs. Thomas and the care staff. Life was gradually settling into a new cadence. Her father, David, had begun taking medicine for his dementia at her parents' residence. Thanks to early discovery, they've been able to drastically limit its growth. They had made the weekly Tuesday appointments to the memory clinic a regular occurrence. "Dad and I are going to play chess today." Her father and she now communicate with each other through their weekly chess games. He had slowly started to express his actual emotions during these leisurely moments. "Didn't I push you too hard?" All of us are attempting to change. While she was still recovering from her diabetes and high blood pressure, her mother, Margaret, was putting in a lot of effort at rehabilitation in a specialized care facility. Her gradual recovery had been firmly approved by her doctor. "Look, Jennifer." Her mother had resumed knitting last week, after a long time. She proudly displayed her handmade gloves to Jennifer, clumsy yet very hard-working. "I believed you would look good in them." Rebecca continued to receive letters from her sister on a regular basis, and her words carried a gentleness that had not previously existed. "Dear Big Sister, I'm slowly getting adjusted to life in the Las Vegas Rehabilitation Center. Addiction to gambling is difficult to treat, but I'm making progress with others who are going through similar things. Regarding the corporate money, we negotiated a settlement arrangement for full payback. Over the following 10 years, I will repay it. I started working part-time at a nearby supermarket where I currently make $15 per hour, but I think this is a better fit for me. The other day, the facility counselor told me something. True happiness begins with living honestly with yourself. Those words definitely ring with me now. I really apologize for what I did to our parents and you. Please let me apologize in person someday." Jennifer thought as she read the letter again that although her sister's road to recovery was still in its early stages, at least she was beginning to confront who she really was. The neighborhood relationships had also settled into a new pattern. Neighbors who cared after her parents' care. Mrs. Thomas, who occasionally hosted supper. The cordial welcome at church on Sunday. The other day, Michael stated, "The power of community is amazing. Indeed, you don't have to bear anything alone. There are always those wanting to help." That may be the most important thing I've learned in the last 6 months at work. And new difficulties had emerged. "We want you to take the lead on a new initiative, Miss Wilson." Last week, her supervisor came up to her. She no longer had to put forth extra effort to satisfy the demands of others. The concept would allow her to make her own decision. Next Sunday, Michael invited her to your parents' place for lunch. "Could I come along?" She was a little taken aback by his request, but it was a welcome one. Indeed, naturally. The family was starting to adopt the weekend lunches as a new custom. Her mother's cuisine, her father's humor, and the contributions of her neighbors. It was a place of modest but real bliss. Perfect families don't exist any place but knowing each other, embracing each other, and supporting one another. A true family may be formed via that procedure. The street and the verdant leaves of the trees were softly lit by the summer sun outside the window. "So should we leave?" Jennifer stood up. She and her father played chess today. She was aware that he would lose, but he eagerly anticipated it each week. Sometimes he would make the same move multiple times due to his medication, but that too was part of their precious time together. As she took up her luggage, she grinned. A quiet summer had arrived after the spring storm. Her life was undoubtedly progressing in this new era. "Come on, Michael." The two of them stepped out into the sunny streets, certainly numerous difficulties to lay ahead. But she wasn't alone anymore. Her heart was warmly warmed by that conviction.